In this tutorial, we're going to make a little rig like this for something like a surgical robotic arm or an endoscope, something like that. So the idea is that we've got a tube that we can animate along a curve, and then we're going to have an inner nested tube that can extend from it, and it's also animated along the same curve but using a different setup. So the technique we're using here is using a joint system, which you can see here, actually two joint systems, one for each. And if you wanted another nested tube in here, you could add a third joint system. And just repeat that and then offset the animation slightly. So we'll go through setting up the whole rig so you can see how this works. There are other ways you can animate things along a curve in Maya. Using the wire deformer is one way, or using a motion path and then a flow path object is another way. I've got a video tutorial about using motion path and flow path. Both of those solutions are a little bit unpredictable and can have some strange artifacting because of the deformer when you sort of push it to an extreme by changing the path of the curve. This way, using a rig allows you to be more precise, and it's a little more predictable. One of the other good things about a rig like this is you could actually animate this path over time too. So I can change the path and it will just update here. You can see even here I'm getting a little bit too extreme. It's breaking it a little bit. Oh, actually, no, I think that might be, no, that's just the inside of the tube coming through. So there can be things you have to be careful of here, but it's a pretty resilient system. And it allows for some creativity when you're planning out your shot and some flexibility in case you need to make a change. It's a pretty common technique to create something like this. Okay. So let's just create this from scratch. Just hide all this stuff, and I've just created the geometry ahead of time. So this is just a cylinder with the cap faces cut off and then extruded in this edge and then beveled the edges, and I just duplicated it to have the inner tube here. Okay, so one thing I'm going to change about these, I realized after I did it, that it'd be better if they were a little bit taller, just because then they'll go right up to the grid lines. So just stretch it a bit. Could probably be a little bit more precise about that. That's good enough. So it just freezes transformations, delete their history. And I'm going to make a couple of display layers just so I can hide things. So let's call this one Demo Outer. Just because you have rigs that are sitting on top of each other, we have to be a little bit careful to make sure we're selecting the right things. So using display layers can really help. Okay, so demo outer and demo inner. Let's do the outer one first. So all we're going to do is go to our rigging menu, skeleton, create joints, and we can just leave this at the defaults. And I'll just hold down X, and you can see I'm doing it in the front view, just clicking on each of the grid points in the midline. Let's go up here, enter to complete, and now I'll just select the bottom joint, shift select the geometry, skin, go to bind skin, reset, just do the standard settings, apply and close. So now if I just go in here and select one of the joints, you can see that they're connected. Now you might think that's a lot of joints to have to control, But what we're going to be using is something called an IK Spline. So we're going to draw a curve that these joints will just follow. So we don't actually have to animate them by hand. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to add this joint to this display layer and hide it. Open up the inner one and just do the same thing again. So I probably could just duplicate that joint system, but just to avoid any potential problems, and it doesn't take long, I'll just draw it again. Now that we're in wireframe mode, kind of get a better idea of what I'm doing here. Nothing complicated. I guess I didn't stretch this one up, so I'm just going to draw the joint system, and before I bind it, I'm just going to stretch this one. I thought I did both at once, but guess not. Okay, so we'll just freeze transformations, delete the history, select the base joint, shift select the geometry, skin, bind skin. There you go. Bob's your uncle. So now we're almost done. We're just going to draw a curve. And I think it's always best just to start with a straight curve for the rigging, and then we can bend it into the shape that we want. So the easiest way to do this is go to Create Curve Tools and create an EP curve. And why an EP curve? Because an EP curve can be created with just 2 clicks. So hold down X, click down here, go way up here, hold down X and click here, hit enter. So an EP curve can be defined by just 2 points. But then when I go in, you can see it actually has control vertices. And I'm going to give myself some more vertices just before we carry on. So I'll go to the modeling menu, curves, rebuild, and let's say I'll give it just 16 spans. So now you can see I've got more to control it with. And I'll delete its history and freeze its transformations. So let's just deselect that, and now we'll go back to the rigging menu. So let's remember, okay, a couple of housekeeping things. We've got our joint system here. So the first joint system is for the outer joints. So I'm just going to name them. Select the first, shift select the last, go up here and change the name to outer joints demo. Right, and it just renames everything. Then we'll just do the same thing here just to keep things tidy. Inner joints demo. Okay, good. Right, so we're dealing with the inner one right now. So we're going to go to skeleton, create IK Spline handle, open up the options. And the important one to turn off here is auto create curve, because we've already created our own curve. Down at the very bottom left, it says left mouse button to pick the start joint. That's down here. Left mouse button to pick the end joint or your end effector. Did that, and now it says select the curve. So you can see something has been created here called IK handle, and it's kind of hard to see, but okay, it's impossible to see. Okay, for some reason it's not showing the IK handle. I might have something turned off in here. Nope. Anyway, let's see if it worked. So if we just go into CV mode, I'll hit B to go into soft selection. Right? And so we can bend this curve, and then if we want to run the geometry up the curve, the IK has an offset function in it, and if we just animate the offset, we can move this thing along the curve. So it's not growing, it's actually moving it along the curve. So if you wanted something that had to extend, you'd need a different solution than this. This is for things moving along the curve. But for something like this, an endoscope, it's not growing, it's actually being pushed along. So this makes sense here. I'm just going to undo just to get the curve back. And now let's just add the IK handle to demo inner and hide that. And we'll add that joint system to demo inner as well. So let's get demo outer. We've got everything here. So we'll just do, did I skin this already? Yes. So we just want to do the exact same thing. Skeleton, create IK Spline handle tool, turn off auto create, select the start joint, end joint, and then select the curve. Let's just rename these IK handles. Inner IK. So IK stands for inverse kinematics. It just implies that you are using something external to control the rotation of the joints rather than directly rotating them yourself. Okay, so now we know that we've got this offset value we can use to animate this thing along the curve. And let's take our curve and put it into its final position. Just using soft selection. So in this case, we want it to go up somebody's nose to get to their pituitary gland. So now if we animate offset, that one's hidden, of course, though, so we can't see it. Let's just unhide. Right, so we can animate this along here. And it's only this long, so, you know, if you go too far, you're going to see the end of it. So a quality of life thing we can do here is actually add easier access to our offset controls, because we're going to want to offset these things together and then be able to offset them separately. And we might want to move this whole rig around too. So a good thing to do here is to just create a circle or something that's going to be at the base of our object. And you'll notice that I'm doing all this in the middle of the world to make my life easier. So everything is just created here, and then I'll give it the capacity to move around. So this is just a controller that I'm going to make. Just something that's easy to select. And I just gave it a shape for no real reason. So I'll call this demo CTRL control. And I'm going to make all of these things children of this. So everything will be a child except the geometry, I think. So the IK, so we want the IKs, the curve, and the joints, I think, to be children. Okay, that might have been wrong. I'm going to undo that. The reason I'm going to undo that is because you can see that the scale on my curve is at 11. I forgot to freeze the transformations, and when I parented stuff to it, they inherited that scale. So this is one reason you freeze transformations and delete history, because of weird stuff like that. So yeah, it looks like the IKs, the curve, and the joints should become children of this. So then I can use this to move around my whole rig. Oops. You know, if I need to position it, then I can just use that to do it. And so it's only one thing to select. Let's just make sure everything still functions properly. Yep, looks good. There is, and this could be handy, I don't know if we'll be able to see it if we turn on wireframe unshaded. There is twist functionality too. So if your thing has to twist, that's already built in, and roll, which seems a lot like twist, but roll rotates it around the entire length, so equally. Then twist, I think you'd see more at the end. Yeah, so you're twisting it rather than rolling the whole thing. So this could be really handy. So back to what I was saying, let's just put this back to 0. Quality of life. So we'll take our controller, open up the attribute editor, and in the transform node, sorry, we've got extra attributes here, but it's empty, but we can create our own extra attributes. So up here at the top, we'll go to attributes, add attribute, and we'll call this one inner offset, and a minimum value of 0, maximum value of 1. It's a float data type, scalar, yep. So it just adds it here. So it's just a slider. Doesn't do anything yet. We'll make another one. And we'll call this one outer offset. Same value, minimum 0, maximum 1, default 0. Okay, so now we just want to connect these to the offsets in the IK handles. It just saves us from having to dig around to find these things, which is kind of a pain. So to do this, it's a straightforward connection. So we can just go to Windows menu, General Editors, Connection Editor. And we want to, in the left side, load the driver. So that would be the controller shape. And on the right side, we'll grab inner IK, and we want to link our inner offset variable to I might not have the right one selected. Hold on a sec. Oh, yeah, sorry, I have the wrong thing selected here. I want to select the IK. Unfortunately, I named them both inner IK. Let's see if I can determine which is which. Okay, so I've got outer visible. So that one must be outer. Sorry, this is adding some unnecessary confusion. But so I want to select inner IK here and load this on the right. Then we should be able to find offset. There it is. So just by highlighting them in blue, they're now connected. And then we will now load the outer IK on the right. It says down here. And now we want to connect outer offset to its offset and then close it. So all this is doing is now I can go into just select this and I have access to both these controls right here. And so if you wanted to add a variable to, or an attribute to control the roll and twist as we saw, we could add these here as well. So this is just a handy thing. So all we're going to do is animate these two things. So, you know, if our camera shot is cut off here, we want these both to go forward. We can set keys on inner offset and outer offset. So let's say over 40 frames, they go like this, so they're moving together. And let's say they stop. And then over the next 24 frames or so, inner offset, continues along to extend itself out. And we'll set a key on that one. There's probably a more elegant way to do this, to have one offset control both of them together than a secondary offset for the inner thing, but I don't know, I can't figure it out, or I can't really be bothered. This will work just fine. So now if we just play our animation, so one thing, you can see that my other one lags behind a little bit. It's just the interpolation is off, and it might not be that visible. It would be visible here, but it's just a matter of going in and controlling these points here. And I think it's because, yeah, it ended up changing my interpolation. When I added the second keyframe on the inner one, so we can just make them a little closer. Yeah, now we're avoiding that problem. So that's what I mean. There could be a more elegant solution where you have one control for both of them together and then a second control for this one, so you don't run into that problem. But it's not such a bad problem. And you know, we can still, like I said, go in and change the nature of our curve if needed. And this thing will respond. Even if we've already animated it growing out, if we found that we needed to change the path slightly, then we don't have to reanimate it. We can just change the curve. And that's as far as it goes. But anyway, you get the idea. If I changed this one, for example, then we don't have to change the animation at all. It will just update. So that is making a rig with an IK Spline. This is the key to the whole thing. Create IK Spline handle. And I hope this is useful to somebody out there. Thanks.